Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 209. Fingers crossed my voice decides to hold out for today. It seems to be hanging in there so far, so I'm happy. It's always more fun to do this one live than to watch a recording of it because it changes a little bit each time I do it just for the fun of it. So today we're going from the world of nice orthogonal box-shaped objects or even the world of sweeps, which is a controlled circular object, into something that people always want to learn how to model, which is the organic shapes, the cloth shapes, the pillows, the things that are fluffy and fuzzy and whatever. And so there's multiple parts to this. One, of course, we have to be able to build the shape in the first place. And two, then we have to be able to texture the shape such that it feels like it should. So it's kind of a two-part thing with being able to model it and then being able to apply the textures to it in a way that makes it look like a realistic type object. I think a large part of the challenge with these kinds of objects is that computers don't have gravity. There's no simulation for gravity. I can't say, throw this sheet out and then have it fall on an object as if there were gravity. There is a drape command which kind of does it, but it's not quite the same as actually having real-world experience. If you really wanted something to be accurate, let's say a cushion or something, you could do a laser scan of that object, get a point cloud, and then generate surfaces from that point cloud, and you'd have an accurate representation of that particular object. And some of the best quality models online that you can buy are generated that way. So they're really accurate. We're not going to do that. We're going to build them from scratch ourselves. And a large part of this, though, is thinking about what an object looks like and observing that kind of an object in real life. So rather than just arbitrarily making something up, think about the couch cushion that you sat on this morning. What happens when you sit on the couch cushion? What stays depressed in that couch cushion? How does it wrinkle? What does the fabric look like? So a large part of learning to model it is actually just learning to observe what the stuff looks like and how you would model it, where the folds in the fabric are, those kinds of things. So we're going to start today, and I'm going to build a couple different styles of cushion just so that you can kind of see how I would go about doing it. And I think the key here is that we're getting away from trying to model something that is, say, this with, filleting the edges or something that's very controlled. We're getting away from starting with a box and editing it. And we're instead going to start creating some custom surfaces to generate this object. So to do this, I'm going to use a bunch of curves to start to establish what the profiles of this object would be, and then we'll eventually get to surfaces. So I'm going to start first with just a rectangle corner to corner, because I need to start somewhere. And I'll start at point 0, 0, and I'll have my other point at the opposite corner of this cushion. I'll do this cushion at maybe 18 by 24. So I'll say at 24, 18, and yes, I am in inches right now. So when I type that in, it's showing up correctly. Let me type Z for zoom, followed by S for selected, so I can see my object. OK. That could be the outline of a cushion. Now, typically, a cushion doesn't come to a perfectly sharp corner. So I need to be able to start to edit these corners and manipulate them a little bit. The other thing is that this shape is currently a closed polyline. I'd like to break it into its component pieces, so I'm going to go ahead and type explode. And once I've exploded that, each of these is its own separate line. These lines are fundamentally straight, and they're defined by a point at either end. That's how Rhino's recognizing them mathematically. So if I were to take one of these lines and turn the edit points on, which is this button right here, I'm going to get a control point at one end and a control point at the other end. Not much to it. If I wanted to start manipulating this line, it would be really nice to have a few more control points on that line, even though the line is still relatively straight. So let me take this line, and I'm going to use a command called rebuild. And I can type in rebuild, or I could go to the edit menu and choose rebuild. And this allows me to change the point count, or the number of points that are defining this line. So the point count here, we'll go up to maybe 7. And the degree, 1, 2, or 3, has to do with how much curvature the line has. Now, it's a perfectly straight line, so technically this is a one-dimensional curve. The number in parentheses is the current number. So our point count is currently 2, and our degree is 1, meaning it's a straight line. I'm not going to worry about the z direction curvature just yet, so I could go to a 2-dimensional curvature. It doesn't really matter because, like I said, ours is a flat, straight line for right now. And so the rest of this, I'm going to delete the input, and we can preview it, by the way, but no surprise, nothing's changed. So I'll just go ahead and say OK. Now, when I go and turn on those edit points, you see that instead of a point at just the point at the end, there's also all of these points along the way. That's a good thing as I start to manipulate it. So let's go ahead and rebuild the other curves. I don't have to do them one at a time. I can rebuild them all at once. So once again, I'll go back in and I'll do edit and then rebuild, or I could type rebuild. I'll leave the settings the same here. I'll say OK, and I'll turn the points on for all of those as well. Let me switch over into the top view for a second so we can look down on this object. I think it's a little bit easier to see it. And we can see that I have a bunch of control points that are starting to define these lines. If I select any one of these control points, let's say this one, and I went to move it, look at what happens. Right? It changes that line from being straight to having some curvature to it. So let's start by doing these corners. So I'm going to select both endpoints. So there's actually technically 2 points underneath each other, 1 and 2. I'm going to select them both by dragging a box over both of them. And then I'm going to move these in to essentially round off that corner. I'll do the same thing here with this set, and we'll round off that corner. The reason I like to do it this way versus doing a fillet on the corner, which I could do, is that ultimately I'm going to want them to come together at the corner versus having a joint and a curve in between. Yeah? Because there's 2 separate curves. So this curve here is separate from that curve there. And that's why there's 2 points on the corners. They just overlap. And that was because I started with my original rectangle and then I exploded it, which gave me individual. If I hadn't exploded it, if I had just the rectangle and I rebuilt it, it would change the number of curves on the rectangle and keep it as one continuous polyline. So I want them to be separate because I want control of them separately. So I'll pull this one in a little bit, like that. And I'll pull this one in like that. Notice I could put it too far, too. So we'll do it about like that. So it's nicely smoothed around. When I adjusted those, you see that the rest of the cushion started to have a little bit of curvature to it, too. That was on purpose. The reason that we rebuild it and we create the edit points that way is so that we have some more control over these points. So the next thing to do is we could also adjust. Let's say we wanted this middle one to come out just a little bit. We could pull this one out just a little bit on the cushion. Likewise, we could pull this one out just a little bit if we wanted to. And again, this is about observation in reality of what's really happening. So we could pull this one out just a little bit, and maybe this one gets pulled out just a little bit. So if I switch back into the perspective view, we see that I took what I started with being a nice straight rectangle now kind of has some curvature to it. It's a much more organic shape than the straight-sided rectangle. It is, however, perfectly flat in the ground plane. And chances are the cushion wouldn't be perfectly flat in the ground plane. There'd be a little bit of adjustment to it there as well. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to turn my points back on, and I'm going to move a few of the points, and I'll take a selection of a couple of the points here. I'm going to type in move and then V for vertical, and I'll move them up just a little bit. I don't want too much. I don't want to have that. But just a little bit of up, maybe about like that. Takes them out of being perfectly planar at the bottom. Maybe I'll move these corners up just a little bit. Again, not much. Subtle move. So now I have this shape, and I'd like to be able to create a surface from this shape. So we're going to use a command called network surface, or a curved network. And essentially what we're doing with this is we're saying, please create a surface using this group of curves as a guide. And in order to do it, we need curves that are going in two different directions. We can call them the x direction and the y direction, but they don't have to be on axis. So generally speaking, we have curves that are running in this direction, there and there. And we have curves that are running in this direction, there and there. I can take all four of those curves. I can go up to Surface and then choose Curve Network. The key command for it is networksrf. So it's a curve network if you're picking it from the menu structure, and it's a network surface if you're typing it in. And when that happens, we get the surface from curved network, a dialog box here. And essentially, as long as we're getting the A, B, C, and D sides, we're good. We'll go ahead and say OK. And Rhino then builds a surface for us that has a little bit of curvature to it, that has an up and down, that's a far more organic shape than just a flat surface or a patch or anything else that we could create. So for right now, I just wanted to show you that. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to keep building with my curves. But this is where we're going. So I'll take this first group of curves right here. I'm going to take all of them. I'm going to copy them in place. So I'm going to go to Transform and then Copy, or I could type Copy. I'll copy in place. Then I'm going to move them, V for vertical, the height of the cushion. So maybe 6 inches or so. So I have the next group of curves. Now with this group of curves, I'm going to start to make a few more adjustments. So the top of the cushion may have some more up and down than the bottom. So let me turn my points on. I'll select some of my points. I'm going to do that one next. Hold on. I'm not going to do that one. Move, V for vertical. We'll drop those a bit like that. I'm going to drop this and this. Move, V for vertical. Drop those down just a little bit. And let's move. I'm just going to do the middle one up just a little bit. Now, I've spent a little bit more time observing what's happening on a seat cushion that I'm making, because obviously I knew I was going to have to make this cushion. So some of this I'm guessing a little bit. But if you see here, I'm thinking a little bit about how if a person had sat on this cushion long enough, right, there would be a depression for each leg on the front of the cushion. And some of the stuffing would have pushed out toward the back, causing the back to rise up just a little bit. So again, those are observations of what's happening. Now, if it was a brand new cushion, would this be happening? Probably not. It would be relatively smooth. So you'd have to think about what it is you're trying to make. Obviously, I'm trying to show you the more organic side, so you get the skills for that, but then you can tone it back if you don't want it to be quite so rough. So I now have that upper surface that I can make. That's good. Let's think about the sides. I'm going to go ahead and create new polylines that are going to go from each of these corners. Let me turn on my object snap. I'm going to turn on end, mid, and perpendicular. And I'm going to go from this end down to that end. And I'll hit Enter. I'll repeat the command by right-clicking, and I'll go from that point to that point. Enter. I'll go from this point to this point. I'll press Enter. And I'll go from this point to that point, and I'll press Enter. So I'm starting to build out the shape. Each of these has some control to it as well. So right now, if I were to turn the points on any of those, it's again a straight line with 2 points. If I want some more control, I might take those lines. Hold on a second. There we go. And I might rebuild them. Let me go to Edit and then Rebuild. I don't need 7 points here. I maybe need 3. Then I'll turn my points on, and and you can see that it's giving me 3 segments and a few of these few extra points. Let me go ahead and take small groups of them, and this is where seeing it in all 4 views at once can make a difference. So I'm going to take those points in the top view here. If I can type move, I'm going to move them so that this line curves out just a little bit. See how it's curving out? I'll take the next group, I'll select it here and here. I'll move up into the top view, I'll move, and I'm moving that again out at about roughly 45 degrees, like that. I'll come back here. I'll move these out just a little bit at the corner. Oops. So there's a mistake. I didn't select them in this view, so I ended up selecting the top and the bottom too. I want to make sure that I'm selecting just the 2 middle ones. We'll push them out. And we get back to the last 2, which would be here and here. And we'll move those 2 out. So now I've created the framework to be able to build out this cushion using those curved networks. So the top surface, right, would be 1, 2, 3, and 4. This curve and this curve going in one direction. This curve and this curve going in the other direction. It's important to note that they meet at the corners. They don't overlap, and they don't extend past each other. They're not short either. So with those established, I could go up to my surface, curved network, say OK, and that builds that surface. And you can start to see that the surface has the depressions in it. Now, I have the leg depressions, and I guess there's a little bit of a butt cheek depression, but typically there'd be more of a depression right in the back, kind of like a horseshoe. So maybe I want to have a little bit more control over this surface. Let me delete it for a second. I can add another curve. Let me go with a polyline, and I can go from the midpoint here to the midpoint there. Let me take this curve, let me rebuild it. So same thing, edit, rebuild. Let's do that one with 7. Let me turn my points on. There we go. And I'm going to say, OK, well, I want this back end here, these guys. We're going to move them vertically, and we're going to stick those down a little bit more, maybe about like that. So I've taken those, and in all reality, these might have to go up just a little bit. Let me move them, B for vertical, and we'll push those up just a little bit like that. So now, instead of just 1, 2, 3, and 4 to do the curve network, I can add this one as well, because it's going in the same direction as these curves. With those selected, I can go back up to my surface, curve network, say OK. And now I'm getting the depression here in addition to the depression there and there. Do you see how I'm starting to customize what's happening in that surface? So I can do the same thing in the front here. So if I were pushing with my legs down on the top here, I'd get a bulge underneath here and underneath here that I wouldn't be getting in the center. So I need to make that adjustment. So I could, again, snap to this line and snap to this line. Now, I'm not on this line, so that's a problem. So this is one place where you can actually get away with the near snap. I don't like the near snap. I caution you against its use a lot. I haven't yet, but I will later on in the semester. But I do want to make sure that I snap to this somehow. So we're going to make sure I get to that curve there. I'll make sure I get to the curve roughly perpendicular right there. I'll hit Enter. I'll do the curve over on this side. So same thing, near, down to perpendicular, Enter. And then I'll make sure I turn off near. The risk of the near snap is that you think you're on an endpoint or a midpoint, and suddenly you move the mouse a little bit and you're not quite anymore because the near snaps to anywhere near the line. So just be aware of that. So I'll take these two, I'll rebuild them. We'll do a rebuild of 3. We'll show my edit points. There we go. I'll select there and there. We'll move those, and we'll have those stick out a little bit more in that section. I could add another line down right down there in the middle. It's not going to be concave, but it's not going to stick out quite as much. So let me show those edit points. And we need to push those out a little bit, like that. So now I'm ready to build this front surface here. So I would take this, 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 and this. Notice they're all roughly going in the same direction. And then I'd come back to the top, or the bottom and the top. And then I'd say surface, curve network. OK? And now I'm creating that front surface. So same rules apply for the sides. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Curve network. In the back, I want to bulge out in the center here. So I'll do a line, middle. I'll select it and rebuild it. I'll turn my edit points on. And we'll pull that out a little bit more to compensate for all the stuffing that's been pressed down from your legs. And we'll take 1, 2, and 3 in the first direction, followed by 1 and 2 in the second direction. You don't have to pick them in order like that. It just helps mentally to think through which ones you're picking. And I'll go ahead and I'll curve network that. And that builds the back edge there. Same thing, 1, 2 in one direction, 3, 4 in the other direction. And that builds that part of the surface. And then the last one is underneath. So 1, 2. It has to be the curve, not the surface. 3, 4, right there. And one more curve network, or I can type in network surface, and that builds that surface. So I was able to create a much more organic shape by controlling it with these curves. And that's the important thing to start to understand, is that we're giving ourselves curves that are then controlling the surfaces. And Rhino's doing the work of interpreting the difference between one curve and the other, and how we make a smooth surface between them. So I've created that as the start. Now, curve networks, where do things go wrong? It's worth spending some time talking about where things go wrong in a curve network. So let me do some examples. Let's say, and you guys have to bear with me while I draw out some examples here. There's an example that won't work. OK, so if I have this and I want to create a curve network out of it, I'm going to go up to surface and then curve network. Oh, well, of course it did it. Gotta love it when it works and it's not supposed to. I guess it was too rectilinear of an option here. OK, that looks pretty good. But if I take these, oh, don't tell me it's going to do it anyway. Oh, come on. OK, well, it's not supposed to work when that kind of stuff happens. Let's see if, watch, it's going to do this for this one too. Yeah, of course it is. I can't make it not work. All right, well, I will throw something where it won't work. Watch, this is going to work too. Yeah, there we go. Finally stumped you, Rhino. OK, so you know, before I was very conscientious about a curve going, those two are in the same direction, these two are in the same direction, and then suddenly I end up with this one. Well, Rhino can't determine which direction is this going in. It's going in one direction or the other direction, but I don't know which one. So it throws up the error of, do you want to manually select the curves? That ends up being problematic because we have this curve that doesn't really tell us anything. So when I'm creating a curve network, I never want to draw a curve that has curvature on it that goes diagonally across to try to build out the surface, unless I build these three together. So I could do those three and do a network surface. Because as weird as this is, there we go, curved network, there we go, it still recognizes this diagonal as a direction. So technically speaking, and I know this is weird, I have this one and this one are going roughly in the same direction, and this one is roughly crossing it. So they don't have to be perfectly parallel. They can be on a diagonal. But I couldn't have these included with it and have it understand. So I'd have to do this side first, followed by this, oops, that side as a separate operation. So I can't do them together. OK, so let's continue on with back over here. We'll experiment some more with curved networks in just a second. So now I have this, and it's relatively ready to start thinking of as an object. So remember, we had that exercise 208 file from last class that had the sky and everything in it. That's a great place to do some test renderings. So I'll save this as a cushion. So I'll go to File, Save, and we'll call this couch cushion. That's probably not spelled correctly. Let me put it on. Nope. How about in the correct folder? There we go. Pillow. There you go. Then I don't have to try to spell it correctly. Pillow. Yay. OK, so we'll call it couch pillow, and I'll click Save. I can go back to the course website. We can go to last class, which was 208. There's that test rendering sample file. We can open that one up. And I'll go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And we will go find that couch pillow. And I'll go ahead and say OK. We're going to link it and reference. And we'll drop it in right here. So if I were to render this right now, we'd get an output, but it doesn't have a material on it just yet. So now it's time to bring in the second part of this, and that is bringing the material on and thinking about how the material is going to come together. So I'm going to go back to my couch pillow here, and I need to think about how the materials are going to be applied. So let's go to my layers. I'm going to delete all the rest of these because we don't need them. I'm going to call this one pillow. And then I need to apply the material to this. So let me open up my V-Ray Material Editor. So I'll go to V-Ray Material Editor. I'm going to right-click on Scene Materials and choose Load Material. We'll go to my flash drive in my Resources folder. In the V-Ray Materials, we can go into Fabric. It's right here. And there's a bunch of different fabrics that you can choose. Now, depending on how you're trying, obviously what you're making, and also what the pillow needs to look like, there are some that are rather exaggerated patterns, and there are some that aren't so exaggerated. So if I was trying to seam this together such that it was just a small little stitch, not a big joint, no piping or anything, then I might use just a simple fabric. So maybe a woven tan fabric. Let's try that one. Let's go ahead and open that. Come on, V-Ray. There we go. I'm going to take the woven fabric. I'm going to apply that material to the pillow layer. Say OK. And then we could actually look at this in rendered form. Like that. We'd say, OK, well, it's applying the material to it. We can see the woven fabric a little bit. It's not too bad. The scale, the texture mapping of the material, though, is different on the top and on the sides. So here's our opportunity to apply some form of texture mapping to this object. And we have a couple different options here. And depending on the cushion or the pillow, you're going to have to spend some time deciding how this is going to work. So I'll select the whole set of surfaces. I'll go in, I'll go to my texture mapping, and the easiest option would be to do a box mapping. They're roughly box mapped, so let's go ahead and try that. We'll do a bounding box, world, go ahead and cap it, and then I'm going to do x equals y equals z to equalize the fabric as we go around, which is not bad. But if I look carefully at the corners, there is definitely going to be a seam where those come together, and if I'm not right at the corner, you can see how the texture is giving me a seam here. Can you guys see that on the projector? And that has to do with how the projections are applied. So is this a quick and dirty way of getting a reasonable cushion? Yeah, sure. If I saved this right now and jumped over into the render file here, and we said, let's update this, and let's render it again. Oops. If I'm far enough away, is it really going to matter? Probably not. So that might be a good way of getting a decent quality texture map of this particular cushion. And I didn't spend too much time doing it. If, however, I wanted to do a close-up of how those seam together, I might need to spend a little bit more time. So in that scenario, I'm going to come back here. Instead of applying a box map to all of these shapes, let me select them all. I'm going to delete the mapping. Oops, sorry, that wasn't what. Delete the mapping. In that scenario, I might do them one at a time and apply a surface map to them. So the surface map is based on the surface itself, but I'm then going to have to play around with the scale. So I could apply the surface map to this one as well. But this scale is different than that scale. So I might have to spend some time adjusting here. Until I can get the two scales to be roughly the same. In that scenario, however, there is not going to be a seam other than the seam I created. So that's fine. And you could certainly spend the time. And if you were really worried about your close-up rendering, you might spend the time to do it that way. But if I jump back to this one, the end rendering here turned out pretty reasonable. I think the scale of the material is off. It needs to be a little bit smaller, but it turned out pretty well. And you can't really tell on those corner seams. So in this scenario, the other thing that I didn't do is that it's coming to a fairly sharp edge here. And if we observed our fabric a little bit more, we would want to round right around the edge because that typically has a little bit of rounding to it. The other option, though, and this is especially relevant if we picked a patterned material, is sometimes we hide the seams to begin with. And you've seen this happen on couches many times. So in that scenario, let me change my material. I'm going to go to my V-Ray material editor. And let me go ahead and load. I'll do the black and white swirl. Why not? Apply material to layer. Here we go. And all of a sudden I have a bunch of swirlies. I'm going to apply the box map to this again, assuming that that is a reasonable texture map for it. Yes, go ahead and cap it. There we go. And I'll do x equals y equals z. Now in this scenario, I might spend some time adjusting the texture map. So I might show the mapping and turn on the gumball and decide how I wanted the pattern applied. So maybe I wanted the pattern applied that way. Point is, take your time. But in this scenario, no matter how I do it, there's always going to be issues at the seams. Right? There's no real good way around it. I also created a really nasty seam right there by rotating it. So maybe I'd go back and keep it in that scenario, like that. So instead, I could use a physical object to help myself out. So let me select all of these. I'm going to hide my texture mapping so we're not seeing it. There we go. And in this scenario, I'm going to create a little bit of piping that goes around the outside of my object. So I'll start with a circle. And I want to draw the diameter. So I'll type D for diameter of the little piping. So maybe the piping, I don't know, is 1/4 of an inch. So let me do 1/4 or 0.25. And let me change this into shaded mode for just a second. And I'm going to turn off my gumball. Now I need to stand that little circle up so that it's roughly at 45 degrees. So I'm going to use a rotate 3D. We'll start. And I'm going to snap. And we'll say right about there. And I'll snap to right about there at perpendicular. I'll hold down Shift so that that stands up. You see how that's kind of standing up roughly at 45 degrees there? Next thing to do would be to move. I'm going to move it vertically just a little bit.
Did you do the 45-degree
rotation again? Sure, I'll do one over on the other corner just so you can see me do it again. No problem. So I'm going to do the circle. I'll snap right to that corner. I'm in diameter mode, and I'll do a diameter of 1/4 of an inch, so 0.25 inches. There it is. This then needs to rotate so that it stands up at 45 degrees. When I do the rotate 3D, I can guess at where that 45 degree is. I can come out here and snap for that. If you're struggling to see that, you can also turn on Quadrant Snap. And it should allow us to snap to quadrant. There it is. Let me turn off perpendicular for a second. There you go, quadrant. And you can rotate it in groups. So I'll rotate it up first, and then I'll rotate. This is actually a regular rotate. Until I'm at 45 degrees. Sometimes it's useful to look at it in the top view so you can start to see where that 45 degrees would be. It's roughly about there. So it depends on how you want to go about it. So once I have that cross-sectional curve and I've moved it to be where I want it to be, then it's just a matter of doing a sweep. So I can sweep one. And if you guys remember, these were all separate curves. They didn't become one curve. I could select them all and join them. Or when I type sweep one, notice I have the option to chain edges. I'll go ahead and click on chain edges, and that will allow me to say 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'll go ahead and hit enter. Cross-sectional curve. There's my cross-sectional curve. I'll hit enter. There's my seam. One more enter. And it builds my piping that goes around the outside. Now, if you don't have it quite at 45 degrees, or your cushion does some funky stuff, sometimes you'll have to spend a little bit more time at the corners. This corner is an example of where it doesn't quite match up. But again, as long as I'm not 3D printing and I'm rendering it from back here, I'm never going to be able to tell that there's a little bit of a seam there. So now I have that little bit of piping. I would probably put the piping down at the bottom too. I don't think that would hurt to do that. So same thing. I'll go back to my circle. It would be 0.25. Again, I need to rotate it. So I'll rotate 3D. And I'm going to do this all in one. So I'll snap to perpendicular, and I'll come out. Maybe it'll help if I'm looking down on it here. I'll come out roughly at about 45 degrees. We'll snap again to here. I'm holding down Shift so that it rotates up. There it is. I need to sweep one. I'm going to chain my edges together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Enter. Cross-sectional curve would be this. Enter, enter, and it builds out that part of the piping. So now that I have that established, if I switch back into my rendered mode here, we can see that I have the piping going around the outside. It might be useful to create a different material for that. Maybe it's just a solid black piping, in which case it probably wouldn't hurt to have a sublayer for piping. There we go. Let's change those onto the piping layer. Change object layer. And then let's go into my materials. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the fabric. I'm going to duplicate the fabric. And then I'm going to take off the diffuse map. Oops, sorry. Let me change this to none. So I took away the pattern on it, but I kept the texture. So I kept the same texture, but I took away the pattern, and then I'm going to change the color to be in black. And I should call this fabric black. So you guys see how I just modified the material? So the texture of the fabric should be the same. I just changed the color of the fabric. And so if I preview it, it should turn out black. That's fine. Oh, wait. V-Ray, material editor. I need to take the black material and apply it to my piping layer. And now I have that applied. So at this point, I would go ahead and go to File and then Save. And we can jump back over into my test render file. I'll go to Edit, Blocks, Block Manager. Let's update this. Now it has the piping around it, and I could go ahead and perform another render of it. So in this scenario, the piping does a great job of hiding the seam at the top. Is it that good for these side seams? No. But would we have piping going down the sides? Probably not. So there's always issues. You can't win everything. But that's certainly a way of building out the material here, or the object. So that's an option to hide the seams. The other option would be to go in and continue to fine-tune the edge so that it feels like it's stitched together in those profile curves. So that's a relatively rectangular cushion. What about like a throw pillow? What if I wanted to do a throw pillow? Well, that's a little bit different. Same concepts, but it's a little bit different. So let me go ahead and I'm going to save this and then start a new Rhino file. I'll go to File and then New. I'll pick a large object, inches. And this time I'm going to work on that throw pillow instead. So I'll come over here. And again, I'm going to start with some basic, either a polyline or a rectangle. So we'll start with a rectangle. I'll say at 0, 0. And then, why is that not at 0, 0? That's weird. At 0, 0, 0. Whoa. Oh, this is relative. Thank you. See, even I make mistakes. 0, 0, 0. There we go. And let's say this is 18 by 18. There it is. I'm going to take this, same as I did last time, and I'm going to explode it. That gives me individual line segments, like that. Same concept. I'll select all of them. I'll rebuild. I'll go to Edit and then Rebuild. And we'll rebuild by maybe 7. I'll turn my edit points on right there. And I'm going to soften up these corners a little bit. Now, if I didn't want them to be quite as rounded as last time, I could rebuild at a higher value. So on the rebuild, I could say that instead of 7, I want 12. And then when I show my points, you see that they're much tighter at the corner. In which case, when I go to pull this back, it's going to be a much tighter corner. So same thing. Sometimes people like to do this in the top view. It's easier to see. That's fine. We'll pull this one back. Like that. All right. Same thing applies on the sides. So we can envision, for example, that I want to have a depression on this side. You know how people like to put their hand in the top of the pillow and whatever. I could do that. I'm going to take these and start to move them down. So move them down. It's going to take some work because of how many times I've rebuilt it to kind of work my way down a couple points at a time. And I also may find that this isn't quite as smooth as I want. But the truth is that when you do that to a pillow, it's usually not symmetrical and it's not perfect. So let's make it a little bit not symmetrical. We'll move these over a bit and cause that. So it's always better not to try to do it perfectly. And so a little bit of dragging and moving can really get you to get some good results. So let's move this up a little bit higher. And you know what? Let's take this one and let's move that up just a little bit higher there, like that. So I'm adjusting that top a bit. The other sides are all reasonable, but instead of having them perfectly straight, I always like to shift them just a little bit. So let's turn those points on too, and let's just I'm going to do them in groups of 2, actually, so we don't get any flat spots. So I'm just trying to adjust it so it's not quite a perfectly straight line. Same thing here, points on. And it doesn't take too much. Points on. But it softened up those edges just a little bit. So I have this, but instead of copying this and creating the second tier so that we've got 2 flat surfaces, this time I want to think about this as a pillow going this way. So I'm going to draw a line that goes from that corner there across to that corner there. And I may end up wanting one that goes on that side as well. We'll see. Let me start with this first one. I'll rebuild it. I'm not going to do it by 12. I'm going to do it by fewer. We'll do 7. I'll turn my points on. And I need to start to create the profile of this. So let's take all of them except for the ones on the corner there. We'll move them up. Oops, sorry. Move V for vertical. And we'll start to think about those coming up. I'm going to deselect, hold down Control, deselect those 2, move V for vertical again, and we'll start to pull that up a little bit higher. And again, symmetry is not critical here. So V for vertical, and we'll bring that one up just a little bit. The nice thing is that they're all related to each other. So you can see the curves adjusting as we start to create it. So that then builds out the side profile. Now, we've squished it here, so maybe this one needs to be a little bit higher. So we'll say V for vertical. You guys are going to find that you go home and spend a lot of time staring at your couch pillows today. And so we push that one up just a little bit. And maybe this one actually ends up going down a little bit. Let me turn those edit points on. V for vertical. I'll drop that one just a little bit. And so I'm starting to create that profile there. So we can think of this, and this as one direction, and then this, and this is the other direction. Remember, this is that scenario where I can't do both at once. But if I wanted to do them all, I could actually join this and this into one curve. And that would be roughly going in this direction, same as this, and same as these two. So we could take it a step further. I could take this, and I could join them. I could take this, and I could join them. And that would end up with this, and this all going in one direction. And you say, well, wait a minute, there is no other direction. It'll still work in this scenario. So I can do network surface. Oh, no. I guess it does need that other curve. So in that scenario, we would need to add this curve, or I should have done it the other way. Sometimes I make mistakes. I could, yes, I have that one. I could take these two and join them. I joined the wrong ones. And those two and join them. And I'd end up with this curve and this curve roughly in this direction, this curve in the opposite direction, and I could do the network surface from there. Yep, there we go. I could say OK, and it's going to build out that side for me. So if I wanted to add some more, let me change this into shaded mode so you can see it. So if I wanted to add some more definition to this, I could work with this curve. I could rebuild it again. And I could turn my points on. Now I run a risk here, and that is that if I took these curves, let me move them up. Oops. Helps if you type V for vertical. Move them up. Move these guys up a little bit. That's good. Now, those two don't match up. So if I started to take these and tried to do a network surface with them, of course. So it's going to average the two and put them in between. You used to have to be really careful about this and make sure they intersect. But in this case, it's averaging, so we're not going to worry about it. However, if you want to make sure that they do match up, you can turn your edit points on both of them. And you just have to take this curve and move it by snapping to point from there to point. And now they're definitely intersecting at a point. And you can get good results. The advantage of having these curves go in each direction is now I have even more control over what's happening. So I could say this is actually bulging out on this side a little bit less. Like that. Maybe this is even a little bit less. Move V for vertical. Like that. Versus this side, which is bulging out more because that is squished down in this area. So you think about this shape that you're starting to build. And so now I have those in both directions. And I can go ahead and build out the top half of this. So I'll go up to Surface, Curve Network. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And that then builds out the top half of this cushion like that. Now, I can take the same set of curves, and I can mirror it, or even the same surface, on the underside. So we'll go ahead and take those curves. I could type mirror. Actually, I don't need to take those curves. All I need are the two cross-sectional curves there and there. Mirror. And my mirror plane needs to be selected in one of the side views. So I'll go to the front or the right side view. I'll mirror it. And now I have the underside there. And did I mirror across the wrong direction? I don't know. I don't remember. No, they're reasonable. Now, the truth is that this side would probably be a little bit different. So it would be worth selecting it, turning my edit points on, making a few more adjustments. So maybe those need to get flattened out just a little. Oops. Sorry, I just needed the points. So maybe I'll flatten those out just a little bit, etc. I'll take all those curves again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Same thing, surface, curve network. And I'll build the underside of that pillow. This pillow then needs to stand up. So we would take the pillow, actually we'll just move it vertically and we'll adjust it in the other scene. Let me move it up just a little bit like that. I might move it up so that it's actually sitting. Maybe about like that. There's my pillow. I'll save this. So let me go to File and then Save. And this would be Throw Pillow 2. And I would come back to this file here, and I would drop that one in. So I'll go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I can drop it in there. There's the throw pillow. Now this might be a good opportunity to use the gumball to kind of position this one. So with the object selected, I'll turn on the gumball, and then I'll do some rotations of it. Because I don't need to worry about being too precise. So maybe it's like that. Move it up just a little bit. All right, so I end up with the throw pillow next to the other cushion like that, and I can go ahead and do the render. Now this throw pillow doesn't have the materials applied to it just yet. So we see the shape of it there, but we haven't done the material. So we've got the same challenges on this one as to how we deal with the materials. So if I went back to my original throw pillow here, we have to think about how materials are going to be applied. So first off, we need to load some materials. I'll go to my V-Ray material editor, V-Ray, and then Material Editor. I'll right-click on Scene Materials and choose Load Material. And again, it's very dependent on what kind of fabric you pick. If it's a benign fabric, here's some dark gray bedding. See what that one looks like. Apply material. Oh, I got to organize here. Let's get rid of these extra pieces. Delete. Ah, that wasn't what I wanted. Call this throw pillow. Apply material to layer, throw pillow, OK. And we'll switch into our rendered mode so we can take a look. Yeah, not too bad. So in this scenario, the material is applying over the top of the surface here. We can look at these in two different ways. So one way, like this, it's a surface mapping. It doesn't actually have a map on it yet, but if I applied a surface mapping to it, it would look the same. We can change my pattern, so we could say maybe it's at 2. So it's a little bit more dense. But I don't know if you guys, yeah, you can see it. See how it swirls a bit? It has a little bit of a swirl and a stretch to it. Fabric typically has that, so I'm not overly worried. It might be a nice look. If I wanted that to go away, however, I could change the texture mapping to be this other option, this planar mapping. What this does is applies the material straight down from above. So we'll go ahead and say bounding box. We'll say world. I'll go UVW. And it's now applying it straight down on my object. So if I were to look at this in, say, the top view, you might be able to see it a little bit rendered. All the fabric is exactly perfect, regardless of the stretching. There's no swirls. It's just straight. So that might be a look that you're after, depending on what the material is, as to whether you want the pattern to turn or to not turn. It's just a matter of how you apply the texture mapping. The problem with that is that it'll look great here, and the closer it gets to the edge, the more distorted it'll start to become. So I'm going to go ahead and take that material back. Sorry, here. Let me delete the mapping. I'm going to take both of them. I'm going to apply surface mappings to them. I'm going to change the UVW repeat to maybe 1.5. Maybe a little bit more. Go to 2.0. There we go. Now that that's done, I would go ahead and go to File and then Save. And I can jump over into my scene here. Edit, Blocks, Block Manager. Let me update the throw pillow. And then we can go ahead and render that out again. And there we go. We start to see it with its on it. Now, the other thing that happens is notice how in my object here, the top of this where I've depressed is perfectly smooth. Right? Typically, you do that, and it's going to wrinkle in some way. So I really need to do some more finesse with the curves to add those wrinkles. And it wouldn't be a bad thing for me to get a pillow, do it, and look at it, and start to evaluate the wrinkles to copy it. You know, is it a bad look? No. It did a pretty good job of making an organic shape. The other thing that I'll point out is when I was careful about setting this up against this, I didn't show the point where this contacts this in the rendering. And by putting it, I imply that this is leaning on that, but I haven't actually shown the point of contact, so I don't have to try to figure out how to make them attach to each other. You put one thing into another, it's going to depress. It's going to cause an intersection between those two in real life. And you would have to compensate in the model for it. I don't want to have to compensate, so I change the rendering angle so that I don't have to. So I'm not showing that on purpose. OK? So that would be how you would create the kind of throw pillow. What about some kind of a curtain or that kind of an object? So I'm going to go ahead and create another new Rhino file. So we'll save this throw pillow. I'll go to File and then New. It's going to be a large object, inches again. There we go. And so this time I want to create a curtain. This could be like a tablecloth. It could be a shower curtain, any of those kinds of objects. So in this scenario, I'm going to work with the same set of skills. So let me go ahead and start with a polyline. I'll start at 0, 0. And I'll say that this is going to be, oh, I don't know, 4 feet. Something like that. I'll take this line and then rebuild it. And I'll rebuild it by, I don't know, a few more points. Let's do 12. And let's take a look. And that looks pretty good. So now that I have this rebuilt, I'm going to go ahead and take every other point. So I'll take this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. And I'm going to move all of those points this direction. Start to look familiar? And so we'll move it that direction, I don't know, by, let's go 2 inches. Perfect. Then I'll take these points, so there, 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 and there, and I'll move those 2 inches in this direction. So I'm starting to create the wave of that curtain. This is perfectly precise right now because they're evenly spaced, etc. So there's always a little bit of adjustment necessary. So you might move one over just a little bit. You might move this one over just a little bit because it's rare that they would be exactly perfect. And maybe this one comes back just a little bit. Maybe this one actually doesn't stick out quite as far. So just a little bit causes it not to be quite so perfect. I'll take this. I'm going to copy it, V for vertical. And so we'll go up. Typically, you go up 8 feet or whatever. So depending on the height, or at least 6'8", 7 feet, something like that. So I'll type 7 feet. There it is, 7 feet. And I might even decide to keep one in the middle. So let me copy V for vertical. Let's do 3 feet. I then need a polyline at this end and a polyline at this end, like that. And I can build this into a curtain. So I can take all of those, the same process here, surface, curve network. And now I have that set of curtains. What happens if I want it to sway or bow? I can do the same kinds of things. This time, I would take these pieces here. I might need to rebuild these two curves first. So let me rebuild real quick. And I'm going to do those as 5. Show them here. I'm going to move these 2 points so that they end up right on the ends of this line. Then I can show all the points. And I'll take all of these points and I'm going to move them. Or shrink them. So let me do a scale 1D from there to there. See how it's shrinking or extending those points? We'll shrink them back a little bit, maybe to about like that. It billowed out too much here, it billowed out too much there. We need to do some more adjustments. Let me scale 1D. We'll go back to about there. This point needs to just move. We'll move this one back, maybe to like that. But part of the advantage here is you've got all those points to start to adjust as you work through it. We'll leave the backside straight for now. And in this scenario, I can come back and take these and do my network surface. And the curtain's going to start to pinch and wave in that direction. I could also turn these guys both on. We could take these, we could move them out. Like that to create a billow at the bottom. I'm not going to do it here. You'll see it transition from here to there. And suddenly you can start to get that kind of a sweep, like with the wind blowing sort of thing. So all of those things are possible once you understand the curve network and how you start to manipulate the curve network. Now I have to show you one more thing relating to the curtain just because I can. And that is what happens if you want sorry, to create a curtain rod that goes through it. So I need this point here and this point here right now currently are at the middle I need them to extend a little bit past so I can get the full curtain. So let me turn those points on really quick. And I'm going to take those and that point there. Actually, I can't do that at the same time. There we go. Let me move this so that that comes around all the way to be in line with those points. And this point here, I need to move that so that it comes around to be in line with those points like that. I'll come back and I'll do my network surface. So we'll do surface curve network. We'll say, OK, that built my curtain. Now I want my curtain rod to go through this. So I'm going to look at this in the side view. So I'm going to look at it right here. And I'm going to draw the curtain, the hole that the curtain's going to go through. So I would draw a circle. And so let's say that that diameter would be 1.5 inches. And then I'll move this so that it's roughly going through where I want it to go through. So maybe something like that. And if you guys remember back to the project command, here's a perfect opportunity to use project. So I've got that circle. I can use project, select curves and points to project. I want to project that circle onto this surface. It's going to punch the holes through the curtain for me. I'll be in the front view here. I'll type trim, and we'll cut through. And if we were looking at that in shaded mode, you'd see that I just cut through where all of those curtains would go. Then we need to build out either a sweep or a cylinder for the curtain rod itself. So this is maybe a diameter of 1 inch. I'm not going to worry about it too much in terms of its placement. Move this. It would be hanging right up at the top there. And suddenly I have the curtain rod going through the curtain like that. Let me move this back just a little bit like that. And now that's going through. And so you can start to see how all of those are reacting. Now, I should tell you that I've been modeling in Rhino for a really long time. So as I sit up here and I do stuff like this, remember that I've done it for a long time. And so don't panic when yours doesn't turn out perfectly on the first try. It's going to take some practice. But that's what today is about. It's about practicing these things. So what I'd like you to do in terms of your exercise is I want you to figure out something that you want to try to make. It could be something that you want to make for your assignment, your table and chair. If you want to make a cushion for your chair or something like that, start with that. That's not a bad place. If you can, go through each of the things that I did, each style cushion, that's going to teach you a lot about curve networks. The key command today, you can tell that every day I'm trying to teach you one big thing. The key thing today is obviously the network surface. We'll come back and revisit this many times throughout the rest of the semester. When you're done, make sure you give me a nice rendering of your work. I talk in the my voice is about to go. I talk in the handout about adding it to the Rhino block library and all the rest of it. If you don't feel like adding it, I'm not going to grade you down because of it. If you don't feel like it turned out well enough, that's OK too. But at least give me a rendering. So obviously I didn't apply materials to this. I didn't load it in as part of my final rendering. But you guys get the idea of where I'm going with it. OK? So I know I talked for a long time, but I want to turn you loose. I want you guys to practice. Let me know if you have any questions.